Hey, I want to welcome you to Overtime, which we are taking Sunday's conversation with Craig and Jen about relationships and about marriage to Overtime. And if you didn't get to tune in, I really want to encourage you to listen to part 3 of Fresh Start, where we were talking about relationships and marriages and really practical things to help us all experience what God desires for us, which is ultimately intimacy in all of our relationships. So make sure to tune into that. And at the end of that conversation, Craig actually talked about something that was in their marriage that was lurking kind of in the shadows, that was under the surface. And I said, we're going to actually talk about what that is. And so I have a very frank discussion that I'm going to have with Jen and Craig, and I've just got to warn you. It is a little bit after hours. It is a little bit rated R, so I want to prepare you for that. But it is an incredible, honest, and vulnerable conversation that ultimately can help us all take a step and experience a fresh start relationally. So I can't wait for you to listen in.
I thought it was counting down from 3, 2, 1. That's what I was waiting for.
All right. So you guys ready for this?
Yep.
You ready for this? Mm-hmm. See, now we need that music. I'm
sorry.
All right, here we go. All right. Hey, Craig and Jen.
Hey.
Thank you guys for extending this conversation in Overtime from Sunday. And I just want to thank you guys again for just talking about relationships. I mean, relationships are just tough. They're, you got to be intentional. You got to be after it. You got to be thinking about it, self-aware. And speaking of intentional, again, as I said on Sunday, thank you, Jen, for your point about, make sure, keep it at the top of your priority list. Yeah. And so after hearing that, I went home and I talked to Jill and I said, babe, I think we need to go on a date. And so she's like, oh, really? And I could see her excitement. So I was like, okay, let's go. And I was like, let's take the 67 Mustang. I finally got it running. And we went to El Monumento in Georgetown, and we had a great date. And so thank you guys for just that encouragement.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think
fun.
Jill and I should create a Mustangs Wives Club, where we can hang out and
commiserate being,
losing
our your husband with the car.
Because Craig, you got a Mustang too, right?
I do. 2009.
Well, we were talking just before this podcast about it, and I was showing you pictures and all that stuff because I am brand new to this whole world. This is awesome.
Huge fan. Love those cars.
Yeah. So thank you guys for the encouragement and just again for the vulnerability. I think it's so incredibly important, and they're very, very helpful points. And so I just want to pick up the conversation and just kind of go there. So we're just, if you're cool with it, we're just going to jump right in.
Sure.
And talk about what you were saying, Craig, at the very end.
Okay.
And you used some words like, hey, there was something in the shadows. Mm-hmm. There was something below the surface. And as much as we tried, so, checking the boxes, doing the things we talked about on Sunday, it kept holding you back. Mm-hmm. And it felt like your relationship kept, if you will, kept going underwater, and then you get a little air, go back underwater, maybe I don't know exactly if that's what it felt like. So can you guys kind of pick up the story there and just talk about that dynamic? Like, what was happening in your relationship? Jen, what did you suspect? Mm-hmm. What was in the shadows that you felt? Craig, what were you thinking, and what did that feel like relationally? What was that dynamic there?
Mm-hmm. I think one of the things that I noticed the very first year that we were married, so we actually came back from our honeymoon and received a letter in the mail. And it was the result of Craig's life insurance test, whether or not he was approved. And he was actually denied because he had, his levels were really off.
Mm. Well, they specifically said potential kidney failure is what it said in the letter,
So you did the blood work and the whole thing, and it came back not good.
Not good. Yeah.
Okay.
And so, one of my biggest fears was that I was going to get married and then my husband was going to die. And so here we are, we get back from our honeymoon, and I'm like, oh my gosh, my biggest fear is becoming my reality.
Right.
And so, of course, we went through the whole process of, he had a kidney biopsy. We went to all these doctors. And the point was, and he's fine now. He clearly didn't die. We've been married 20 years.
That's fantastic.
Right.
Yeah.
It's a miracle.
Right. But the hard thing is that for me, if I get bad news, I want to be around people. Mm-hmm. Like, I want to share. I want to talk about it. I want to be comforted. I want to be encouraged. And Craig's response was to just withdraw and turn totally inward. Like, he did not want to talk about it. He did not. I mean, this is our first year of marriage. He didn't want to have sex. Like, it was just, I was like, who are you?
Just withdrawing.
Totally.
And was this a pre-existing condition? Did you know about this, or was this a surprise to you? So this like hit you like a ton of rocks as well.
Totally.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. Interesting.
And so that first year, I started suspecting, like, first of all, there was this withdrawal. We weren't talking like I thought we should be talking. We weren't having sex. And then I started noticing things, like there was a charge on our cable bill. And literally, I was on the phone with the cable person, and Craig heard me because he was about to tell me what the cable charge was, because it was a pay-per-view movie. And he comes around and he saves himself at the last minute. Oh, Jen, it was just a samurai movie. You don't need to talk to him. And literally, he hangs up the phone.
Yeah, and I could imagine your heart was probably beating like, oh no, this is the moment. Like, I cannot get caught.
Yeah, I actually still kind of feel a little bit of the anxiety even now, like just thinking about that memory.
And this is all year one. So what year is this?
This is year one. Like, this is
2000.
Yeah.
2000.
Oh, that's right. You guys got married on the perfect year to remember your anniversary.
Oh, yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
So then I would say also, you know, in our apartment, we had to come out of the bedroom and around the corner, and the computer didn't face that. So, like, if I was coming around the corner and he was looking at porn, which I didn't know, but he would, like, immediately close the window browser. So, he was just staring at the window screen. So, all of these things, I'm like, I'm wondering. But I'm 22 years old and really had never thought about porn. Like, I'm like, my belief was, well, if you would just have more sex with me, then you wouldn't need porn.
Right.
Because that's what I thought it was about.
Sure. Just purely physical.
Right.
Yeah.
And at 22, you don't know anything. You just really don't. And so then but I just kept suspecting, but I could never find proof.
Yeah.
And then 2001, we had moved to Pflugerville, and we were living in our first house.
And this is your second year of marriage now?
This is our second year of marriage,
Okay.
between 1 and year 2.
Yeah.
And we shared a computer, and I was doing something for work. I used to be a teacher, and for some reason I typed something in the URL, and it just started populating. And I clicked on one, and I was like, oh my gosh. I mean, like that, I can even feel that physical sensation right now.
Right.
It's like pure dread just washes over you. But then there was this, like, also, oh my gosh, I'm vindicated. Like, I'm not crazy.
Yeah, you've been suspecting this
for
some time.
And I'm like, okay. And so, but I was livid. And I'm an external processor, and I do not hold my emotions well. And so I just went at him, and I was like, what the bleepity bleep is this?
Sure. Yeah.
And he's like, I'm so sorry. I'll never do it again. And I was like, okay, you've been caught. You feel the shame you're supposed to feel. That should be enough to keep you from porn.
Right. So, Craig, this whole time, like the first couple of years of marriage, the computer's position, like that was intentional. I'm guessing maybe, just because it's like, hey, I know what but like, was this something that going into your marriage, like as a teenager, you were introduced to Playboy, you were introduced to that kind of stuff, and then like, you were thinking, hey, once I get married, it's going to be solved and it's going to go away? Or was this something like, as you got the news the first of your marriage, you may die, or your kidney, the news with the blood work, was that a result to go, I've got to do something to feel good?
Oh, no, it was very much the former, not the latter. So
Okay.
I was introduced to it very early, late elementary school time frame. So I brought it into our marriage. And I think that was a really good summation for my thought was, okay, now that I'm moving into a relationship where sex is readily available anytime I want it.
For the most part.
Yeah, for the most part. Those of you who are married are probably laughing, going, that's not reality. But, being this is my first marriage and my only marriage, I did not have that foreknowledge. But my thought was, hey, this is something I'm doing. And so once I have, a wife, I won't need this anymore.
Right.
And that was not the case at all. And Jen describing that first year of marriage was really good because, I am an internal processor. And so I deal with trauma, I deal with stress, I deal with anything, really positive and negatively internally first, and I wasn't in the habit of sharing that with anybody, not especially Jen, and that caused a lot of friction early in our marriage, and so my thing was I just wanted it to go away, right? And I didn't really know why, what the root of it was, or why I did it, and I certainly wasn't able to reconcile, the fact that Jen and I were intimate, physically, and it still didn't seem to have any impact.
Right.
So, but I didn't have any really tools or understanding or self-awareness to understand, like, okay, these aren't really adding up. Right. Like, it's supposed to have gone away, but it's not. And then when she caught me that first time, that quote unquote smoking gun, there was a tremendous amount of shame. But my immediate reaction is, okay, I've got to like manage this, right? Like, okay, so I need to get her to a place where we can just move past this. And it wasn't really more focused on, okay, I need healing. There's something deeper here that's going on. It was more like, oh, I got caught. I need to stop. Cold turkey is like, okay, like anything else, like a bad habit, right? But it's not really a bad habit. It's something else.
Right. And when you guys got married, were you going to church? Like, was God part of your lives?
Oh, yeah.
So when it came to porn, were you like, like Job 31:1, I've made a covenant with my eyes not to look lustfully upon a girl, or, any of the scriptures that talk about this idea to go, I'm feeling conviction, like this is wrong. God, please help me, but yet I can't stop. And
right.
now, I'm having sex, so I'm physically, consummating my marriage, physically, like, engaged, but now I still want this thing to a computer screen.
Yep.
And it's like, that's weird. Like, what's happening? And did you feel that tension and the tension with God to go, like, God, are you mad at me? God, help me restart. God, like, maybe this time can, and trying to keep it secret the whole time. Was that dynamic there?
Yeah, I mean, growing up in the church, and we met at church, and we were going to church this whole time, there was that, it was hard for me to reconcile, right? Because there was that guilt and shame of not only hiding something from Jen, but recognizing that this is not how I should be living, and how I should be treating my body. But even then, like that early on, I didn't really have a category of like, okay, this is self-abuse. Like that would come much, much later, as I would go through and did some self-work and some therapy about that, but like, and God revealing a lot of stuff about what's going on internally with me. But at that point, it was just like, okay, I didn't really understand the depth and the power that it held in my life at that moment. Yeah. It seemed like it was just bad decision making, right? Like it was, okay, I'm stressed, I'm gonna go do this thing. Yeah. Or I'm lonely, I'm gonna go do this thing. Right. Or I'm bored, I'm gonna go do this thing. Right. That's kind of how that was my level of understanding at that time.
Yeah, I mean, we didn't know it was addiction.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
for sure.
It was. I mean, I don't even know. I mean, maybe some small corner of the world, people were talking about porn addiction, but the internet now is populated with thousands. I mean, you can Google porn addiction, and it's like you get 100,000, maybe more search results. I don't even know. Like, I didn't even think to put that into a search engine then.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, this is like the early 2000 time frame, right? So, I mean, it was new ground for sure. Right.
And we knew no one that was talking about this.
Yeah.
So we thought we were literally the only ones.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's so interesting because it's, when you're going in, it just feels like this is just like I should be able to stop. Like just, pray a prayer.
White knuckle it.
Yeah. Hey, for 21 days, if I can create this habit and, just these kind of things. And it is a deeper thing. Yep. There is something more to it than simply just, hey, it's a switch. I can flip it on, flip it off. And the whole thing, did you experience a lot of shame with it to where it's like the idea to go, hey, I'm lonely, I'm stressed, whatever it may be. And so I go cope. I look at porn, and it feels, great in the moment. And this is the whole concept of deception and sin. It's the idea it feels fantastic, but then the after effect of that, the ripple effect of that is like this shame. Hey, I've got to keep it secret at all cost. No one can know this. As long as no one knows, everything will be okay. And then that pattern just goes over and over and over. Is that what you were experiencing that first couple of years?
Oh, sure. I mean, it was a complete cycle, right? It's kind of what you're alluding to is, there's a stimulus, would that be loneliness or boredom or stress or whatever it might be, or it might be just an image that popped into my head one moment, right? And then to make that decision to engage with pornography, then in the moment you get that high, you get that kick of dopamine, and then afterwards, as you start to come down from that and you realize, okay, here I go again, it's that cycle all over again. And there's the guilt and the shame and then the fear and the anxiety of, okay, if I'm discovered again, I'm going to have to deal with that then.
Right.
And it's like it's a never-ending loop.
And then the whole thing, the dynamic in marriage is when that shame is present and you're having this huge internal conversation and you're wondering, like, what's going on? What should I do? The marriage dynamic is so interesting because when that's happening, now all of a sudden, Jen, you're present. Now you're not alone. And she's seeing this big internal thing that she has no idea about. And now there's all these questions because a normal human response would be, my husband is like quiet, he's withdrawn, he's like, it feels like he's having this internal conversation. Is it me? Is it me? Is it me? And then you're asking what's going on, and you're going, hey, I can't allude to any of it. So I'm fine. And she's feeling lonelier and lonelier and lonelier, and you're going, I got to keep it more and more of a secret. And that whole marriage dynamic is just a recipe for disaster. And that's what it sounds like you guys were experiencing.
Yeah, and just I want to make sure that, my response is not necessarily indicative of everyone's response. Like I'm a withdrawer, I'm an internalizer, but it might materialize in explosion, right? So others
could come out in anger.
Exactly, it could kind of come out sideways. So just because someone's withdrawing, or there's other signs than just withdrawing, right? But that's just how it manifests with me, because it's just kind of how I'm wired and how I'm built.
Yeah. Wow. So this is 2001. You catch, look on the URL, you catch him. You say, hey, what's going on? He's like, I promise it's not going to happen again. So what happens from there?
I mean, just like Craig said, it's a continual cycle. I can't tell you how many times I caught him, either found stuff on his phone or on his computer, or caught him in the act. And so, every time is still incredibly painful. But the good news is, because I have my own relationship with Jesus, I was able to allow him to kind of retrain my thoughts and how I perceived it. And because the truth is, like, there weren't a ton of books. Like, I just felt like it was me and Jesus. Because I had the shame too. Like, I'm like, I can't tell anybody about this, because then they're going to think I'm a bad wife and I'm not good enough. And if I just lost 50 pounds, or if I did, was sexier in the bedroom, or whatever it may be.
And were those all the thoughts you're having? Like, when you discover the images and you discover porn, you're thinking now you're self-conscious. You're way more self-conscious.
Totally.
The insecurities flare up.
Right. And
now you're struggling big time as a result of that.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah.
I mean, so not only like it was a trust issue, but it was like every lie, the enemy told me about myself felt true in that moment. Like, I wasn't good enough. I'll never be good enough. There's no way, unless I pay thousands of dollars in plastic surgery, I will ever look like that.
Right.
And so then I'm like how do I even compete with something that's not even real? I mean, like, Photoshop was a real thing back then. Like, I knew enough to where, like, I'm like,
right.
That's probably not the true version of reality. So God just really started teaching me that this is less and less about me and more about him. Like, the porn wasn't about sex, it was about escape. Because I started putting together clues as to when he would, the withdrawal was a huge red flag for me. I knew that when he stopped talking to me, he was probably engaging in pornography. And so my initial response to this whole thing, though, before I was even able to get quiet with Jesus, and I'm talking about years, this is years, I was like, well, this is a behavior problem. This isn't a heart problem. Like, if he just changed his behavior, then things will be better. And so I'm like, well, I will come alongside you and help you change your behavior, right? Because that's what I thought as 23-year-old what you should do. And so I was like, well, here's our list of rules. So the rule is you can't delete anything off your history. So if I go in and there's a clean browser history, then I know you've been looking at porn. The computer has to face a certain way. You can't be in the extra bedroom by yourself, or if you are, you have to have the door open. I mean, we had a whole long list of things. And I just got to the point where we call it D-Day. And it was Mother's Day, and we were.
How long is this into this?
So Hannah is now 6 months old. So this is early 2006.
Okay, so 6 years into marriage.
Yeah, I mean.
So this has been over and over, and hey, I promise I won't do it again, and then just this whole battle.
Right.
Okay.
And I will say that in those 6 years, like, we would have conversations because I am very tenacious, and
You, Jen?
I know, and divorce was never on the table for me. I'm like, we will not let this take us down. And I'm like, this isn't what I signed up for. My parents got divorced. I mean, 6 months, that was another 6 months after we got married, my parents got divorced. So you think about all the things that you don't want to happen in the first year of marriage, like we experienced them. And so my point, so we would have conversations and I would feel like we would make progress. And that was what was so hard. It's like then when I would catch him again, you'd be like, oh my gosh, am I back to square one? But we weren't back to square one. But one day, Mother's Day, we had 2 kids, 18 months apart, and Craig was like, go get your hair cut, because we had no money. I was staying at home at this point. He worked at Golfsmiths and made like $35,000 a year. We had an $1,100 mortgage payment. Like we had no money. And so I was like, oh my gosh, he's like giving me this treat. So I drive to the hair salon, and then I get there and they're closed. So I'm like super sad, disappointed. Like, this is my one shot of like, 30 minutes of freedom from
Just
not being a
soaking
mom.
that in. You were like, dreaming about it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I walk in the door, and Abby's in the front watching Elmo, and it's like super loud. But I can hear Hannah crying in the bedroom. I'm like, oh, Craig must be changing her diaper. And I go back, and she's just crying in her crib. And like then it's like that same dread moment, like you just know, as I turn around the corner and the study door is closed. And I was like, and that's where I hit rock bottom, because I was like, clearly
that's
nothing that I am doing is working. And so I handed Hannah to Craig, and I went to the most internal room of our house that I could get away from, which happened to be our bathroom closet. And I just had it out with God. I was like, I do not understand why this even was a remotely good idea. I don't understand why you put me with this man. I don't understand why I have to deal with this. I don't understand, what I'm lacking. I just felt so stuck and so angry. And I just railed and told God all the things that I thought. And at the end, it was like I heard this voice in my heart. It wasn't an audible voice, but it was just this in my heart. And God said, do you want to try it my way? And I was like, in that moment, there was this, oh man, like, is there really another way? And can I trust you with that?
Because you've been trying 6 years.
6 years.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm kind of like done. Like I'm beyond done at this point. And so I was just like, okay. And God said, basically it just pointed out to me that I was only viewing him as a porn addict. Like he was the root of all my problems. And so I treated him as such. And as a person who, I'm a pretty put together, solid kind of person. And sometimes that manifests itself as pride. And I think I really came off to him as, I'm better than you, so get with it. Right? Like, you don't even deserve me anymore.
Yeah, and you could self-justify it all day long.
Oh, totally.
Yeah, I mean, okay, how many times have I caught you, you know, this month? And so, okay, whatever you said and whatever you did, you could self-justify it.
Yep.
Yeah.
And so, it's this craziest thing. In the moment of me being so hurt by someone else's sin, Jesus somehow so lovingly convicted me of my own. Because kind of what we talked about yesterday, the best thing you can do if your spouse isn't committed is do everything you can to stay committed yourself. And so this was Jesus saying to me, if you want to be committed, this is where you have to give. And this is where you have to trust me instead of trusting yourself.
Right.
And so I walked out that bathroom door a different woman.
Wow.
It definitely took... Part of it was you have this heart change, and it takes you a little bit to figure out how the behavior matches that heart change. Right. But it was just okay, Jesus died for me. He's forgiven me all of my sins, however small or big I think they are. But sin is sin. The definition of sin is separation from God. And I know that I had separated myself from God over and over and over, and in many of the same ways. I had old cycles in my life, too, that I was still tied up in.
Right.
And so just that moment of okay, I can see Craig as my husband. I can see Craig as a son of God. I don't have to see him as a porn addict.
Wow. And when you're there, just in that posture, because I felt that posture before, and it's all about Craig and his porn, and look at what he's done, and it's hurtful. So he hurt me again, he hurt me again, he hurt me again. Then it's almost impossible to see my sin. Right. You just can't look at yourself in the mirror because you're so focused looking at him. Yep. And God in that closet met you. Yep. And that's profound. Yeah. Let me do it my way. Yeah. How about my way? Wow. So all that's happening. So Craig, you're caught 6 years in. This feels like a different time, maybe. Like, what were you thinking in that moment? Like, what, did she come out and talk to you, or what was like D-Day for you?
Yeah, I mean, she did. After she had her conversation, she came out, and I don't remember exactly what was said, but I do remember feeling that something had changed and something was different. And so that marked this time of a difference in how Jennifer would engage with me. And it wasn't like, kind of putting my hand, like she wasn't up here saying, get your stuff together and come join me. It was more where she was down where I was and saying, okay, we're doing this together now.
It was a change from a parent posture. Like, I was like his mom before, I think. Like,
right.
Here you have to follow all these rules, to a partner posture.
Gosh. And, I can't help it as you say that, Jen. I mean, that feels like the picture of what Jesus Christ did for us.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Like, came on our field and met us with grace and compassion and truth.
Yep.
But grace and compassion was like the door for truth.
Mm-hmm.
And so Jen is now meeting you with grace and compassion, and feels like it's a different posture.
Right.
Different demeanor. Interesting. So what did you guys, I mean, that's like D-Day. You've had it. You have this like, King David conversation in the Psalms where he just lets God have it and says, I feel like I'm done. You feel like there's now something different. So what were the keys? Like, as you guys said, okay, it's real. What are we going to do? What happened from there? Like, if, as people are listening, just going, okay, what'd you guys do? Like, are you still struggling with porn? Were there, keys to, recovery and reconciliation relationally, and, seeing it as an addiction? What happened?
Yeah, so 2006, it was 14 years ago, and there is a lot that we've done in those 14 years.
Right.
But realizing that for me, Jen understood, I think, at the beginning of that D-Day, that it wasn't just a behavioral thing. There was something deeper there. It was a heart issue. But it took me a few years to get there. I mean, I would say probably closer to 2013 timeframe before I started really catching on that there was some broken pieces in my heart that needed to be healed. And a big event for me in that time frame was I went to a boot camp, the Wild at Heart boot camp, and they talk about the father's wound. And
this with John Eldridge?
Yeah. Great ministry. And God met me in that weekend, and that was really the start of my recovery, because that's when I started to realize, okay, this is just a thing. It could have been drugs, right? It could have been alcohol. It could have been any other, decision or behavior. It wasn't just, I just attached to porn. Right. But all of them are just hole fillers, and it's medication. It's self-medicating a pain that we have. And it's only God can fill that place. And what I didn't realize that, no one told me that, right? Like, God had to show that to me, right? I had to come at the end of myself and realize, okay, I've done everything I possibly can do, and nothing's working.
Right.
But when I started surrendering that side of my expectations and really doing some internal heart work, that's when I started to recover. But it wasn't a light switch. It's a
process.
we're talking like, 30 some odd years of engaging in pornography miracles happen.
Right.
But it's work.
Yeah, and there's so many great resources. Just as a quick pause, that just talk about what porn actually does physiologically to your brain, and it does so neural pathways in your brain. Like it changes the physiological makeup.
Yep.
And as it does that, those are addictions, those are patterns, those are things that you have just simply not only emotionally or relationally have gotten used to, but like physiologically. Your body and the dopamine, hit that you get, which your body loves, that is like saying, hey, you're stressed, get a little dopamine. Hey, you're even excited, get a little dopamine. And for 30 years, you've done that to your body. And to think like, overnight. You know, those stories are great. You know, I love them. They're so inspirational. Books are written about them. But it feels like the rest of us are human beings. And like, it is a process. It takes time.
Yep.
So you're at this Eldridge retreat, and you're going, hey, like the lights are starting to come on.
Yep.
Like, this is a real issue. It's not a light switch issue. It's a deeper heart issue. It's an identity issue.
Yeah, and it's really, that's where God really started talking to me about how I viewed myself, and realizing that I did not love myself well at all, actually. I had a lot of self-hatred. And what's interesting is we move forward a few years, and I'm still struggling. You know, the cycles are becoming bigger, so it's less and less time in between, or more and more time in between these relapses. But my physical body is starting to like rebel. So 2015 is when I had a relapse of the sickness that I had when I was in my early 2000s. And at that point, was it 2015 or 20?
No, it was the summer your mom died of pancreatic cancer.
Yeah. So from 2015 to like 2018 was really, really difficult in our family. So like Jen was alluded to, my mom was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer.
In 2016,
yeah.
and then she died in 2017.
Right. And then that summer of 2017, we had
6 people
six
die.
deaths in 3 months that were close people to us. And then that year, one of my best friend's mom was diagnosed with cancer. And then I got really sick.
In 2018.
Yeah. And so all this was like, and I was diagnosed with an autoimmune disorder, which your body's literally attacking itself.
Yeah.
And there's some evidence to show that some of these are linked to stress or anxiety. And it's just that my body was physically manifesting all these heart things that I had. And it's almost like God was bringing them to the surface to say, okay, look, there's still more work to be done.
Yeah.
Okay, it just made me think of his mom had just passed away, and we were at their house, and he was so internally frustrated and so sad and so just out of sorts. And he looked at me, he was like, what am I supposed to do? I can't drink because of his autoimmune at that time. I can't drink. I can't use porn. And there was one other thing.
I was doing keto at the time, so
Oh,
I
he
couldn't
couldn't
have
eat, like,
Oreos.
anything sugary.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And he was like, what am I supposed to do? And I said, you're supposed to talk to me. And it was like, that's the whole thing.
I love that.
As such a part of any addiction recovery. There's this great quote that says, the opposite of addiction isn't sobriety. The opposite of addiction is connection. And so that's what I feel like what God used so much of his healing came about in conversation, not just with me, but like at the Wild at Heart. Like, he made friends there that knew his whole story in, an hour that some of his friends from back home in Louisiana never knew.
Right.
You know, it's just crazy. And it's like the more he was able to connect with other people, the less a hold these other addictions had over him. And food, porn, video games, you name it.
Yeah, that was the thing that the big issue here is that the isolation that it creates. It's almost like it creates like this fence around you, this guilt and shame. You don't want to talk about it. You don't want to get in relationship with anyone. The act itself is extremely selfish, right?
Yeah.
Because it's all about me, which is the opposite of good relationships, positive relationships. And so that what Jen's saying is, the more I was connected to positive, intimate relationships, the less hold that it had over me.
Right. And just the fact, I think you just mentioned, and I know just meeting with countless men and individuals and couples who have really struggled with porn, is the idea of like, now somebody knows outside of just you guys. Now, when you went to the John Eldridge, now like, okay, I'm going to expose it. I'm going to like take it from this dark place that it's just been festering and growing and, deceiving me. And I'm going to bring it to the light, which is so difficult. But when part of that connection is, I brought it to the light and you still love me.
Yeah.
Right.
I brought it to the light and I'm like, okay. And I think, that's part of the battle when it comes to porn is there is a deeper part, a more intimate part that porn attaches itself to, which is the sexual part that God designed within us.
Yep.
And exposing that deeper part, is so difficult. But when you do, and especially when you're around a group of men or that connection piece, and say, okay, this is me. This is just what I've done for X amount of years. And you bring it to the light, and then it's met with like, hey, me too, or hey, I see you and I love you. That is so refreshing, and I feel like that's half the battle.
Oh, yeah.
So what would you guys say as you think about your experience, and if, a couple's listening in and an individual's listening in, and, they're going, what do I do? Like, what are the keys? Like, are there 1 or 2 or 3 keys that you would just say, when it comes to porn, if that's going on in your life or that's going on in your marriage, here's what we would just say. How would you guys lean into that?
I think the first thing to say is that there's hope. I mean, he's been looking at porn since he was in elementary school, so it's say 7, 8, 9, and he's 45 right now. So like 30 years, 35, whatever years of decades of looking at this, and it is possible to rewire your brain. So just from the beginning, like this is not a sugarcoating, like, it'll just be fine, pat on the back. It's going to be hard. Right. And like the more prepared you are that this is going to be a hard process, the better off you're going to be, right? Because addiction is often cyclical, and it's not a one and done kind of thing. There are layers to our pain and layers to our wounds and layers to our patterns. Like you can get healing on one part, and then it's like, boom, a year later, 2 years later, you're like, God, why am I dealing with this again? And it's just, it's another layer. Like God fights for our wholeness, and God's fighting for your marriage. If you're struggling with this, like God is fighting along with you. I would say too, having that honest conversation is going to be one of the most painful things you do, but also one of the most rewarding.
And when you say honest conversation, is that with your spouse? Is that with a small group leader? Is that with a trusted friend?
I think all of those things.
Yeah.
Definitely need a support group when you're going through this. Like not only the person who's addicted to porn, but also the person who is married to the one that's addicted to porn. Like you need your safe people, and your safe people are not people that are going to bash your spouse. Like they're not going to be like, I can't believe you did it again. He's such a screw up. You need to leave. This is hopeless. Like you need people who are going to fight for your marriage just as much as they're going to fight for you. They need to love your spouse. Just, at least a lot, like they may not love them as much as they love you because they're your friend. But, and I think too, just if you are a woman sitting on the other side of a man who has an addiction to porn, like I just want to talk to you for a second. And I just want you to know that his addiction has absolutely nothing to do with how you look, how much you weigh, how sexy you are or not in the bedroom. Like this is really, really, really not about you. And there is nothing that you did that caused this. And so I think it's really important for you to let him own his stuff. Or if you're a husband who has a wife who is addicted to porn, because it is a thing. I mean, you even reading things like 50 Shades of Grey, oftentimes like women have a different type of porn than men do, but it's still porn. It is still taking away what is supposed to be sacred between you and diverting it into another avenue that is so dark and so not what God wants for you. So I think getting quiet in your own heart before you have that hard conversation, and just it's gonna hurt. Like you can tell yourself all the right things, it's still gonna hurt, and just let yourself feel the pain. Because chances are, if you're not ready to receive that pain and not ready to deal with it, you're just gonna turn to your own numbing behaviors, and then you're gonna just see this wall begin to build between both of you.
Right. Man, I love, my counselor says to me quite a bit and has to remind me over and over, Buck, your way forward is your way backwards. Yeah. Whatever it is relationally, whatever it may be, that what is happening between you and Jill, like it's not a marriage issue. It's a Buck issue. And I love what you just said. And so many times in addictions, we begin to go, well, it's because of me. She's doing this. He's doing this because of me, because of what I've done. I just love what you said. I think a lot of times their way forward, like Craig's way forward, is he's got to go back and deal with some of the roots that are manifesting themselves in y'all's marriage. Yep. And I think that's really, really wise. So hope and the idea of, hey, you've got to talk to someone. You've got to expose it to the light.
And I would say, too, like if counseling is really, really effective, but it's most effective if it's a certified counselor that is trained in sex addictions. Because
that's really good.
Craig, when in 2000, I think
6?
2004. No, at one point Craig became suicidal, and this was in between the birth of both of our daughters. And actually that was the first time I ever called for help, because I was like, I do not know how to deal with this. And so I ended up calling his parents, and his dad talked to him, and he was like, I really think you should go to a counselor. And so Craig did go to a counselor, but this was not even on his radar. Like,
Right.
he could have been a great counselor, but he was not a great counselor in this area. And so what was good from that is that Craig actually told someone else, like, on his own volition. And I think that was a really important first step. Like, you know, if you have this conversation in between husband and wife, and the wife, if this is our situation and the husband is the one addicted to porn, the husband needs to give the wife permission to go tell a trusted friend, because she's going to feel alone. But also, the wife needs to encourage the husband that he needs to use the words to talk. Like, this is not go to couples counseling and the wife just tells the counselor, hey, my husband's addicted to porn. Like, he needs to go to counseling for his issues, and he needs to be the one that actually says that word. Like, that's about taking ownership of your own issues, your own problem.
Right.
And so I think finding a counselor, it's called a CSAT, CSAT, and then when you're interviewing the counselor, because sometimes it's not always the first fit, ask him how he feels about porn, because these sex therapists see way extreme examples, and
Yeah.
they're like, oh, porn, well, that's fine, because at least you're not out doing this.
Right.
But using porn leads to more problems. It's not just that, okay, you're playing in the kiddie pool.
Right. So, Craig, what would you say to a couple who, you know, they're suspecting porn, or there's porn in their relationship, and they're like, you know, Craig and Jen, you know, Jen's like, there's hope in this, and you've got to be able to get it out and talk to someone. Is there anything you would add, or anything that you would say would be helpful in terms of keys to a fresh start, if you will, in a relationship with porn?
Yeah, I like what Jen said about involving others from accountability is a really loaded word, and I'm kind of using that gingerly, but more about just exposing what's going on with you and sharing that burden with someone else. And it's, if we talk about pornography being an individual thing, it's something you do to yourself, for yourself. If you take that pain and that shame and guilt that you feel and involve a community, that's where the healing happens. And so, you know, having that small group of folks that you can go to that said, you know, even in the moment, right? Like, if you're okay, Jen's, you know, gone, right? And the kids are out of the house, and I'm feeling like the itch, you know, can I call somebody? Yeah, I got a whole host of people I can call. I could call Jen, right? I mean, we have been able to bridge that gap of where I can say, hey, you know, I'm not, you know, I'm feeling tempted, right? I'm feeling the itch, and so she can stop what she's doing and pray in that moment.
And I think that that's an individual choice. Like, I signed up for that because that's my personality. Not every wife is going to be able to fulfill that role, and that's okay.
Yep.
You know, it is totally legit. And I love what you were saying about accountability. Like, I think a lot of times, especially in the Christian circles, accountability is about checking boxes. So, hey, you know, how many times did you look at porn this week? Oh, 0 to 1? Excellent. You get an A+. Like, that is not what true accountability is. And I think you should talk a little bit about what you have felt a true accountability is.
So it's really about relationships, right? I mean, Jennifer made mention to this group of guys that I met as part of the boot camp. I mean, we do life together, and we share our hardest struggles. And we do more than just, you know, pray for one another, but, like, you know, we're not in this community to fix one another. We're in this community to love each other well. And because God's the one who's ultimately going to fix the stuff, right? Like, He's calling us to be in relationship with one another, to come alongside someone and put your arm around them and say, I know this sucks.
Yeah.
You know, or maybe even if prompted, hey, if you're feeling bored or if you're stressed, let's go do something.
Right.
and giving alternative.
And even speaking truth when hard truth needs to be spoken.
Yeah, I mean, like, call them. They know my stuff, so they can call me out on my stuff.
Yeah, well,
right?
It's the Proverbs, because I'm the preacher, so here we go, church moment. Wounds from a friend can be trusted, but an enemy multiplies kisses. You don't need enemies in your life just telling you how great you are, and you need that encouragement, because I think a friend does that. But I think in times like this is somebody who's willing to have that harder conversation with you, because they have your best interest in mind.
Right.
They want to fight for your marriage with you.
Right.
And that kind of relationship and that kind of permission to speak in that relationship versus, hey, 1 to 10, what'd you struggle with? Porn.
Yeah.
Right.
Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
That's great. Well, guys, I know there's a whole lot of stats on porn. In fact, I wrote several of these down. And the point of this, for example, like, think about this: the porn industry's annual revenue is more than the NFL, NBA, and MLB combined. And I didn't believe that. So before the podcast, I was actually going, okay, I've got to look this up. And I think like the best estimate is $57 billion worldwide. Some would even estimate over $100 billion a year annually. The porn industry, 11 is the average age a child is first exposed to porn. 94% of children will see porn by the age of 14. 56% of American divorces involve one party having an obsessive interest in pornographic websites. There was one stat that said pornography use increases the marital infidelity rate by more than 300%. So if you're using porn, you're 300% more likely to commit an affair, like an infidelity. And so, it just goes on and on and on. But the point is to go, like, I think porn's a big deal. And I think it's much more pervasive than perhaps people think. Yep. And because it is so intimate, we want to sweep it under the rug. Yeah. So we don't want to talk about it. We don't want to confront one another about it. We don't want to ask those questions. So with as pervasive as it is, if a wife is suspecting her husband is viewing porn, but they've never talked about it, or vice versa, husbands, what would you advise? What would you say? Hey, if you're feeling a lot of the same things you described, Jen, like, what would you tell a wife to go? Do you confront? Do you, like, what do you do?
Well, I think it's kind of like a yes, I do think it's confront, but it's like confront has such that negative tone. Like, my first piece of advice, like, if you're a Christ follower, get quiet with Jesus, because you're going to feel this place like you want the right answer, but you don't. Like, there's a part of you that's going to be like, just tell me no, just tell me no, just tell me no. Because now, especially if you're listening to this, that you're opening a door to, like, a big monster on the other side, right? And that's what it's going to feel like at the beginning. But if the truth doesn't come out, then you're going to be stuck. And the point is, like, your relationship is probably not what you want it to be. And if you don't address the porn, then it's going to continue to stay in that exact same place and probably get worse. Yeah. So part of that is just preparing yourself for the air, like, before a punch comes, like, you brace yourself, and there's a little bit of, like, needing to brace yourself. But on the other hand, there's also this need to access compassion. So you're going to be angry, and rightfully angry. Like, it is okay for you to feel mad. It is okay for you to feel betrayed. It's okay to feel like your husband has stepped out on his marriage, because he has. He has involved another woman in, and maybe even men. There's a lot of crazy porn stuff out there. But he has involved somebody else, or she has involved somebody else in your sex life and in your marriage. So there is God is righteously angry, right? We see that over and over again. But then I would challenge you, or encourage you gently, to see the kid in your spouse. And to know that there is a reason that he's numbing, and a reason that she's veering toward these behaviors, not because of you, but because there's something that happened with them as a kid, and they just have old wounds. So if you have kids, like, even thinking about, like, seeing your kids, like, how would you respond to your kid? And that's a whole nother podcast. Right. How do you deal with it when, you find your kid looking at porn? But you're going to probably be a little bit more compassionate towards your child than you are to your spouse. So if you can kind of imagine your spouse as a child, and just knowing that they have, like, a heart that is wounded. Like, you think about, like, in the war, and you see these people, like, being shot or knife wounds or whatever, your first response is not to, your first response is to go care for them. And that's really hard to access. And it's really not.
And not ask them, why'd you get shot?
Yeah.
Or how'd you get shot?
That's so true. That's so true.
How could you be wounded? Well,
and how could you do this to me when they're the ones bleeding?
Yeah.
I mean, it's just really convoluted. It could be really convoluted, but the point is that the only way you're going to be able to have a compassionate response is to feel God's compassion for you. And to sit with him and be like, God, I feel really broken by this. Like, whatever, if his answer is, yes, I've been looking at porn, it's going to break me. And the only way that I can access your unconditional love and compassion is if you give it to me.
Absolutely.
Like, not relying on your own strength.
Yeah, I love that. And I think that is so incredibly important to prepare yourself.
Yeah.
And, my counselor tells me a lot, Buck, the healthiest gift you can give to whatever is the healthiest version of you.
Yeah.
Like, what are you doing to prepare yourself in your marriage, to prepare yourself as a father, as a friend, as a pastor? With my dad and a lot of issues we had.
Yeah.
I mean, one of the greatest gifts I could give, because he's going to do things that are going to be hurtful, or Jill's going to do things, or I'm going to experience things as a father. And the healthier I can be, the more prepared I can be, then whatever the answer is, perhaps I can meet as Jesus met the woman caught in adultery, with compassion first, and then with truth.
Yep.
Hey, leave your life of sin.
Yeah.
So that's great. That's great. Anything else you would add to that, Craig? Or?
Yeah, I think another thing that we discovered is, intimacy is not just about sex, right? Intimacy is something on a much more deeper emotional connection and spiritual connection than the physical, act of sex. I didn't have that understanding for a long time. I thought they were not mutually exclusive in my mind. They were one and the same. And I think that it's important to differentiate between the two, because folks who might look at pornography as a way of an intimacy enhancer, and it's often marketed that way, it's a lie, because really what it does is it has the opposite effect on intimacy. If you think about the scripture where Jesus, and Jen and I talked about this before, where Jesus says, if you look at a woman with lust in your heart, you've already committed adultery. Well, why did he say that? He wasn't just saying that to say they didn't have pornography back then like we have. It had their version of it, right? But that they had like prostitutes, like temple prostitutes that people would go to. So it wasn't like they didn't have access to the ability, and adultery was around. Like, why would he even think about, okay, if you think about a woman in your heart, you've already committed it, because it's a heart issue. It's a posturing issue. It's, okay, I am looking at this woman, how do I view her? And there's all kinds of studies done about like what it does to a man's view of the woman as a gender, right? Not just his wife or his sister or some woman on the street, but just in general, what it does to our view of the opposite gender.
Well, not to mention human trafficking.
That's the
dark
thing we
culture
need to
that
talk about. Is like, okay,
promotes.
well, you talk about the number of the profit and the revenue it makes. That's just what's been reported.
Right.
There's a whole underground economy.
Absolutely.
That in Austin, Texas, right? Not just New York City, not Los Angeles, not Miami, Austin, Texas. They've busted like human trafficking rings here, within our 20-mile geographic area. Right. So it's real. It's happening.
Yeah, and it just has a ripple effect. So that idea, and I really love the intimacy, intimacy to be fully known and fully loved. And what's even part of what you guys are saying, if there is someone who's suspecting their spouse or significant other as viewing porn, just the conversation itself, and if it's met with compassion and truth, produces in itself, I am now known and you still love me. Yeah. Which is a step forward towards intimacy. And intimacy is what we're really looking for, when we're searching those computer screens or whatever those are. And ultimately, that's what God desires for you. That's what Jesus was talking about. Your heart is longing for intimacy.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's a great point.
Yeah.
And so that's part of maybe the motivator is to go, gosh, this is going to be such a hard conversation. But as you have those hard conversations, you're actually taking a step towards what you've been longing for perhaps your whole life through porn.
Yeah, definitely.
I mean, it's not ignoring the emotions that are going to be there, the anger, the guilt, the shame, the frustration, right?
Mhm.
The hopelessness. Like those are real valid feelings and they're going to be there. The compassion is embracing those.
Yeah.
Right? It's not stuffing them, it's not ignoring them, it's not minimizing them. It's recognizing them, welcoming them, saying, "Yes, like this is painful.
Mm.
This is painful. This is hurt. Like I feel hurt. It's okay to feel hurt. That's the world that we live in. It's a broken world, right? But the compassion is seeing someone in all of their hurt, and even if they're hurting you, and still being able to love them, and love them with the compassion and empathy that comes from God and the Holy Spirit, right? Like it can be a holy moment, and it's really hard, that gap between, okay, I've done this thing, it's a horrible thing, but this person doesn't know it yet. If I tell them, they're going to get mad, they're going to get sad, they're going to not like me.
They may leave me.
And it's hard to envision, okay, but once we move past that, what is going to be the result of that? And the answer is a stronger relationship, right? I mean, it's in between you move through that hard time, that struggle, that suffering. On the other end of that suffering is the intimacy you desire.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's worth it. It's worth the fight.
Absolutely.
It's worth the battle. It's worth, at the end of the day, it's the thing we long for is intimacy, but it may take and require a step of just being brutally honest.
Well, and I would say too, if the couple is listening to this and we're talking about how the woman or the person who has been betrayed needs to have compassion, I would say that also the person who is addicted needs to have compassion. Like, I had said so many wrong things, and Craig has had to forgive me for that and meet me with compassion. Like if you're the person who's addicted and you're stepping out in faith and they don't meet you where you are, like, it's not your excuse to just throw anger back in their face. Like, you get the opportunity to be compassionate too. Like, it is this compassion and unconditional love that needs to come from both parties, especially if you know that you're going to walk into this conversation.
Yep.
Yeah, that's a great point. Well, guys, thank you for just being willing to be vulnerable, to be honest, to share your story. If the stats are right, this is more prevalent than I think a lot of people maybe perceive. And I just think this is such an important conversation. So thank you for your willingness to do that. And here's the deal. I know there are a lot of good resources out there in addition, because there's so many questions and so many different spokes to this conversation that we could chase and talk about. But real quick, I'm just going to suggest 2 books, and I know you guys have written a book as well that I would highly recommend. But Wired for Intimacy is a book that I've recommended time and time again that talks about the physiological side and the intimacy side, and specifically when it comes to porn. What is porn doing to your body? And then what are we longing for, that intimacy, and how can we take steps towards actually experiencing the very thing we long for? That's a great book. That's on Amazon. You can get it. And Your Brain on Porn is a little bit less religious book. And Jen, I know you have one as well. But that's a great book just to talk about what is happening to your brain. Yeah. Like, I think, part of it is the educational piece of the conversation, to be able to take a step and gain some freedom, gain a fresh start when it comes to porn. It's just understanding what's going on to your physical body. So those 2 books are great, Wired for Intimacy, Your Brain on Porn. Jen, I know you had another one, but I'd love to hear about where people can get your book.
Yep. So we actually, the website that is also really good is called Fight the New Drug. So So if
Fight
you're
the
not a
new
big book reader, or you want to just kind of dig around for some of the science and stuff, that's a really great website, Fight the New Drug. Yes, Craig and I did write a book, Pure Eyes, Clean Heart. We wrote it a long time ago, 6 years ago.
2013, I think is when it came
2014.
out. Yeah.
But so recently just went out of print. But the good news is that I have it on ebook. And we have some copies still left. So if this is something that you, basically, we both wrote it together. It's the full story up until 2013 or so of how we journeyed through porn. The good news is, like, we have experienced even more levels of healing since we wrote that book. I think they would probably change a few things as well. But it's if you just need someone to understand your side of the story and have your spouse understand what you're feeling without using your own words, like, this is it's a way to kind of start that conversation. Every third chapter has discussion questions that you guys, because sometimes it's so hard to just, how do you talk about porn in your relationship? Like,
Absolutely.
what questions do you need to ask each other? And so we have copies of that. So if you would like one, you can email me at jen.ferguson@npaustin.com, and I will.
Is that with
hook
one
you up.
N or two N's?
It's with one, Buck.
One N.
Yes, you've been
I would
spelling
put
it wrong
like 3
the
or
whole
4
yeah.
because my grammatical skills are so strong.
JEN.Ferguson
Okay.
at NPAustin. Or you can also call the church office.
Awesome. Hey, thank you guys again for being here. Thank you for having this discussion. Thank you for writing the book.
Yeah.
And just thank you for, being willing to, wade through this story and be an inspiration. And I'll just leave it with this. I love what you said. One of the things you would say to a couple, the first thing you said is there's hope.
There's
Yep.
hope.
And
for
I
sure.
think that's a fantastic thing.
Yeah.
Thanks again, guys.
Thank
Thank
you
you.
for having
All right.
us.
See ya.